Good evening, everybody. My name is David LaFever. I'm the Executive Director of the Methow Valley Interpretive Center, and so I want to thank you so much for being here. I will turn it over to you, Arnold. Arnold's going to start off with a flute prayer and a few words.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be invited to participate in these activities that the Interpretive Center and some other groups, nonprofit groups, basically established here in the Valley. And tonight's presentation is all about the Valley and the people that are in it now and that were in it before now, if you can figure that one out. But we like to gather and especially in winter time, tell stories. And so what happens is the bulk of us start a program or presentation, and it's similar to a lot of other activities. It always begins with a thank you to a lot of people and a lot of folks. And it's a lot of effort at times to put together these types of presentations. It just does not happen without a lot of input from different families, different categories, different religions, beliefs, whatever. But the bulk of the time, people start with a song, right? We all, no matter what we're doing, we start out singing a song. Somewhere along the way, we sing a song. And it's the same as being out in the open, in the country, by yourself, whatever. You find yourself working out in your yard. And what do? A lot of times you're raking, tilling, doing what you have, but you're humming songs to yourself. You're hearing songs that you like, whether they be pop, rock and roll, country, religious, whatever. And you hear them, and they're playing. On a weekend, like now, we go outside, what do we hear? We hear the music of the river, mostly right now. You can hear it. And when you go down and stand on the banks of the river, you can actually, at times, you can hear the fish, you can hear the aqua structure singing songs. And a lot of folks don't realize they're hearing this music. And so we offer, I do, in my own way, I offer up our thoughts, our memories, our happy looks back on our history, on our past, present, and future. And to take these and bundle them all up in whatever form you would like to use your mind with. That's up to you. And all I'm doing is saying, we'll gather up, I will now in my thoughts, gather up what's out there, looking across all of you. You know what you think. I don't know everything you think about. Sometimes maybe I don't want to. And so I do my own process of saying thank you to my Creator. And I send this up again because I enjoy music in several different ways. But my main thank you type is by sending a flute song to my Creator and ask Him to look over all of us and to help us get through the rough times that we are facing now, and that we can continue back to a life that will give us the freedom that we want. I gotta quit. Anyway, here we go. I'll play a little prayer flute song and send it. And those of you that want to participate, fine. You don't have to. That's entirely up to you. But in my mind, we'll all come together and thank the Creator, however we believe in. We'll thank Him for our life, the future life, and the past life of our people. So, if I don't get too choked up, it'll be fun. Thank you.
It's good to see everyone here. I'm glad I could bring you all together. I bet you don't even see each other most of the times of the year. So turn sideways and shake somebody's hand. My name is Randy Lewis. My name shot in the arm. This comes from an old medicine man, old Indian doctor, who would travel around. And he had a real noticeable scar on his arm for being shot during the, the days of rage in the 1860s, 1870s, when the miners were coming in and they still paid bounties on Indians. That's serious. It's a serious reality. And anyway, he was well gone by the time I came around in this world, but for some reason, inexplicably, my grandfolks, my folks, they never understood totally what had happened. But we were at a ceremony. We were at a healing ceremony down in Aswell, where my grandfolks had their ranch. And in the middle of the ceremony, I walked out onto the floor. I don't remember, but a couple of snippets out of this, and started talking and I guess questioning everybody there. And there was a whole circle of people. And everybody just stopped. They stopped their singing. They had stopped their dancing ceremonially. And they were all staring intently at me as I accused them, basically, of things. Two of the Indian doctors, well-respected medicine people, they looked at each other and they're going, "Who do you hear there? Who do you hear?" And the other one says, "That's Kayahan. That's Kayahan. He's been dead for years. For 50 years he's been dead." And the word just went around as people were sharing their agreement who this voice was. And one of them said, whose man is this? Whose little man is this? And somebody hollered, and my mom come running out from the kitchen. She goes, "Oh my God, what has he done?" Because I've had a history of things. So I hear. Anyway, she came out and he said, he explained to her what was happening here. And she said, "I looked at you and you were talking in the west side of the mountains." And she said, "I don't know whose voice it was, but it wasn't you." And they talked for a bit, and then one of the medicine people, one of the Indian doctors said, we're going to pass this name on to him. We're going to pass Kayahan on to him. We're going to name him right here." And they took a stool, looked like, a high stool about this tall, and they sat me up on it. And they told my mother and my grandmother and my aunt to go gather a few things for a giveaway immediately. And so Mom and them ran upstairs, and they had a big, huge closet in which Grandma kept all of her treasures and stuff, and they started unloading blankets and bringing them down. And they had a giveaway, and they named me Kaya and shot in the arm. And I was singing his songs to them while they were doing that. He had 4 songs, and I was singing. And the Carl Jones, who is from Tulalip, who was born in the 1850s, he knew Kaya. He's saying he's got his songs already. He's already got his songs. So they just let me sing and run off at the mouth at them. I was preaching to them. I don't know what I was saying, but I was, calling them down. And to this day, it's followed me. It goes with the name Kaya. And so if I get a little bit carried away, it's not my fault. I'm happy. Call the exorcist if you need to. That's where, so when I introduce myself, here is me, Kaya, Kaya. Just, that is the formal way. My grandfolks, my great-grandmother, great-grandfather, they were from the Frenchman's Coulee and Old Vantage. This is on my grandmother Agnes's side. Columbia Peter, Kunparaskin, and Yapyawik or Yunyawik, Anastasia. That's where they were from. On the other side, on my grandfather's side, Jerome Miller, his father, Samuel C. Miller, the son of Sam Miller, important man in Wenatchi, had the Miller Fur Trading Post, Miller Street in Wenatchi. And he married, I loved it, in one of his little notes, he made note of, upon marrying the Salmon chief's daughter or granddaughter, he said, I thought myself the luckiest man in the whole world. I didn't know she was the meanest one in the tribe. And together they had a son named Sam Miller, who's my great-grandfather, who I stayed with down here at his allotment at the mouth of the Methow. And when I was a little kid, I stayed with him. Basically, we were kind of bound together until he passed away. I was born at a place called Owhigh Lake Flats, above Nispelo. And back then, times were tough. Times were tough in Indian country. 1 out of every 3 children would die before they would reach a year old. The average life expectancy was under 40 years of age for our tribal members. And it has a lot to do with what you're looking at here behind me. The river, the salmon. It all plays a contributing factor in this. Well, just a few months after I was born, my mother moved me down to Ellensburg. My cousin was still in high school, weren't you? You were still in high school when we moved down there. And that's how much older he is than me. But that says something. Those are good genes. We stayed down there, and my Uncle Johnny, his Uncle Johnny, and my mom delivered milk. Remember that, when they were milk people? Mom would dress up in her little milkman outfit, and they dressed me up in my little monkey outfit. I looked like a little, page boy, the way they dressed me up. And, sorry. Well, shortly after that, Mom remarried, and we moved down to Salilo. And at Salilo Falls, I got my bearings on how to walk on rocks, slippery rocks. And Arnold was talking about the sound, the song of the water. There you really understood what that means. Salilo had a voice, it had a throat, it had a beauty, it had a smell, it had a taste in the air. During high water in June, it was churning so loud, it would lull you to sleep at night listening to it. Kind of like the magic of hearing loons in the morning or late at night. It does something to your soul. Well, we were there until we had a real nice cabin. And my grandfolks, my grandmother and grandfather, they fished. My grandfather fished, my stepdad fished. My mom was the only woman. She was the first woman to fish at Salilo Falls, from what I understand. And that took an act of the salmon chief to allow it. People were muttering, and there was all kinds of anger because this woman had been down there fishing. And so on Sundays, we would gather at the Longhouse there at Salilo, and the salmon chief, Tommy Thompson, he was the chief. He was the voice for the Wyamp people, the Indians of Salilo, who were Wishkums and the Wyamp. And he was in charge of that fall. He was in charge. He set the times in which people would fish, in which each household, where each family would fish. And I would always follow him around. He was kind of like my mom said, she took a picture of us, and he's walking and he's heading down to the river. And there's like 4 or 5 of us. We look like little ducks following him. Because he went down to the river in the morning to offer up prayers and to talk to that waterfall, which was a living being in our world. Well, in 1955, a couple things happened in between. I fell off the scaffold. I did not have a harness on yet. I was going down to put it on and watch Mom and them fish. And I slipped and went flying right off the scaffold into the waterfalls. The churn of Salilo Falls was so powerful, it kept me rolling on the top. I didn't even sink. And Johnny Sampson, do you remember Johnny? From Yakima Nation. He was Wishkum. He saw me, and he dipped me out, and he's hollering, Mary, Mary! He's hollering as loud as he could. She finally turned around and he said, I got you a sucker. And I was walking around there. She looked at me, she just looked at me, she goes, that was it. Okay, I learned my lesson. Well, some exciting things happened. I used to haul, one of my aunts made me a long canvas bag that went from my shoulders, had a tump line up here, a strap. And I would run down and they would put 1 or 2 smaller salmon or 1 big salmon in that bag. And it went all the way down to right above my heels. And I would scramble up the cliff and bring it over to the Elsie and Ida Pistolhead, who were 2 of the main fish dryers there. They had their drying shack. And I'd run it over to them. They sit there, and they had a stack of coins, and they'd push a nickel over to me. Or if it was a real big fish, a dime. Filling up those pockets, running back and forth. Well, that's a good incentive. You know, kids will do anything for candy money. There was a little pop stand that got all of it usually. Well, I would watch as a tourist who parked along the highway above Salilo Village to take pictures of the Indians fishing. You've seen pictures of Salilo. Well, those were taken generally by people from the Portland of Oregonian or from tourists. And then they would come down. They'd gather the mental and moral courage to come down and talk to the Indians. And which was really interesting because I would watch them go through, do you sell those fish? Oh yeah, quite often we do. It was so funny. They were just like, oh my God. They've been watching too many Luke Gibson movies. And then I would watch them unloading cash and offering cash for the fish. Light bulb, click, idea went over my head. So I grabbed the eel net with the long handle, and I went down and I started dip netting out of the pools. Suckers and squawfish, whatever else. And I came back up with 2 milk buckets full of these, what they call scrap fish. And I asked Elsie Pistolhead, she was the daughter of Ida, if she would show me how to cut them how to cut them so I could dry them. Anyway, I could yatter off enough Ishkan, Yakima, or Wishkun, so they understood. And they were just laughing their heads off. He wants to learn how to, okay, you do it, she tells her daughter. And her daughter shows me how to bone them out, how to fillet them, gut them, bone them out. And they built me a little drying rack that was probably about this high above the ground, which I had to really stretch to get my fish over it. Because I'm telling you, if I was an inch taller, I'd have been round. And so everybody laughed, everybody would be walking by as I was hanging my fish to dry, laughing, look at him, he's drying those ugly, nasty little fish. Well, the older Indians didn't think that they were nasty. They thought, well, he's got a dog, he's probably gonna do it for the dog for the winter. Something like that. They rationalized it. A week later, those fish are bone dry. I show up, instead of going to church, I show up with my buckets, take all the dried fish off, and up to the road I go. And all the tourists, and I walked up and down the road, hawking these fish, 50 cents a side for blueback salmon, dried blueback. And these tourists, they're just rolling out, shelling out the money until my buckets are all empty. And I have a pocket full of change and some currency, and I go down to the pop stand, and my friend, Alney Reynolds. Anyway, she ran the pop stand, and I pulled out all the change, and she's counting it. I gave her all the $1 bills, and she counted them out and gave me like $5 bills back. And she's just amazed that I made all this money selling scrap fish. But the tourists didn't know they were scrap fish. Matter of fact, they swore that was the best, leanest salmon, dried salmon they'd ever had. No fat on these. And I went back, and my grandpa and grandma had just gotten back and took out my great-grandfather sitting there, and he counted the money. So I turned it over to grandpa, my mom's dad, and he counted it, and he whistles to grandma, and she comes over and she takes it. She rolls it up. Grandpa's sitting there, he goes, up, down the old snake pit. It's safer there than a bank. You know, my grandma, he was right. Anyway, that was our world at Salida. I have great memories of the 100-pound salmon that they would catch in there. Mom caught a 400-pound sturgeon once. It took the pickup to haul it out. She hooked it up to the tow bar and just went flying up. So that sturgeon flew out. I screamed, I squealed and went running. I thought she caught an alligator. It was a monster. She pulled out of it. Okay, those are the good memories. 1955, we were informed by the Corps of Engineers, or was it the PUD? Anyway, they came and told us that we had to relocate out of there. Everybody was relocating. Only the Wyand Indians were going to be taken care of. And Grandpa goes, here we go again. He remembers this, Kettle Falls. Grandpa fished at Kettle Falls when he was younger, and at Rock Island. He fished at Rock Island until 1927. My great-grandmother, Tush, she had the drying racks on Rock Island. She was the only one still drying fish out there until they notified us that we had to. That was the first time we had to leave. Then it would be Kettle Falls where we were told we had to leave. And Grandpa said, it reminds him of the stories of the Columbia Reservation, that they have all been in this great diaspora of the Wenatchi, Chelan, Entiat, Moses Columbia people. We were forced to remove ourselves to the Moses Columbia Reservation, which you're sitting on here. Only to be driven out of here 4 or 5 years later. 5 years later, again, marched out. People were eating their meals when the military came in. They didn't have a chance to grab stuff. They were just forced out. It was our short trail of tears, but that shock, that trauma that our people went through was the end for a lot. It was like being driven out of Vantage and Frenchman's Coulee and the Moses Columbia area down on the plateau. People died. That was not an easy thing for them. They died of heartbreak. They died of just the mental, spiritual trauma that they went through. It was our exodus. No, it wasn't the exodus. The exodus was then returning. Now is our time for exodus. Anyway, when we were driven from down there, we tried to go to Wenatchi. We figured our upriver relatives would grant us places to stay. But when we got up to the Wenatchi, we were told we weren't wanted there. Not by the Indians, by the pioneers who had taken over our areas. So both bands headed up to Moses Coulee, where we would stay for a little over 2 years before the Moses Columbia Reservation. This was shortly after the Nez Perce Wars of 1877. Shortly after that is when the government, the military, found it necessary to get all Indians into one area. So they wanted us to go to the Yakima Reservation. And we did, that wasn't our people. We were Wenatchis, we were Moses Columbia, and Pascosa. And so there were a few families that were married into Yakima, or Yakimas had married into it. They went to the Yakima Reservation. Even my relatives, the Timanquaw, they went down. But somewhere during the next week or two, they realized this wasn't their home. So in the middle of the night, in the cover of night, they left along with a few other families and headed north to rejoin the Wenatchis. And that's how the Moses Columbia Reservation. See, most of the Methow people are not Methow. We are not culturally, linguistically, we're close, but we aren't originally from here. We were placed here, mostly at the lower end of the Methow, from the town of Methow to the mouth. And the allotments went around down to Aswell. Some allotments were from Lake Chelan. That's where we ended up, only to be driven from there. So our story is one of being moved, told to move, forced to move. As Wenatchi people, as Moses Columbia people, as Entiat people, always we had to move, always we had to change, to make way for the invaders. Not all of the pioneers had ill feelings towards us. We were on good terms with a lot of the pioneer families. And we remained on good terms. It's really interesting. I look back at my grandfolks and I asked Grandma, I said, how could you endure this all? Grandma's family, my grandmother Agnes, her family, Columbia Peter family, and Boraskin, they were murdered for their land, which became Star Ranch, Star Orchards. That's the legacy. Aswell, which once all belonged to Chustus, my great-grandmother, who was married to Ishwag, who was from Frenchman's Coulee originally. That was his allotment. But when he got there, he wanted to be with his people more, who were Moses Columbia people over in Nespelem. So he literally abandoned her, and she got the Indian agent to change the deed and title, all that allotment land, over to her, which my grandfather Jerome and his brother Henry would inherit later. And have I exhausted my 4 hours yet? Anyway, we were driven from there. Originally, they came in they wanted to purchase the land. And my grandmother told the guy from the PUD to get the hell off the land. If he didn't, he'd probably get shot when Grandpa got home. So he left. Grandma explained to him what happened. Grandpa said, well, they ain't gonna give up. And the next thing they showed up, they had a writ of expulsion. The rights of eminent domain. They seized the property, booted us out. We got basically what it amounted to is salvage rights. Once again, moved out. So we moved up onto the Colville Reservation, first to the terrace, then to the Colville Reservation, where my other great-grandmother Nancy Monica from here, she was Methow Indian. She was the one that was married to Sam Miller. She was part Methow and part Wenatchi. Well, her allotment up on the Colville Reservation. See, it was very funny because they allotted us where there was no water. There was no river. We're a river people. We're a salmon people. And they intentionally did this to break the culture, to break the language. Then they moved in and snatched up the kids and sent them to St. Mary's Mission. Save the Indian, kill the man. Before it was the only good Indian was a dead Indian. Then it became, it was not cost effective to hunt down all the Indians. They just thought, okay, save the Indian, kill the man. So they intentionally tried destroying the culture, the language, by building the dams on the reservations. That put an end to the culture. It put the end to the, well, I was telling you earlier that life expectancy of our tribe was under 40 at one point. Why do you think that was? I'm waiting.
No salmon.
It was a food source. It was a cultural renewal. It was a covenant to the Creator that we would look after the land. We would look after everything on the land. You can't imagine what it does to the chemistry of your body and to your brain when a food source that you had become a part of your DNA for 12, 16, 20, 30,000 years is cut off, totally severed. What that did to the mental health of our people can't even be explained. It cannot be quantified just how severe that was. Insanity, self-destruction. You see and you hear of the time of the drunken Indian, the image of the drunken Indian. Why the fuck wouldn't you get drunk? Oh, I'm sorry. Why is it fuck? P-H-O-C-K. Would you not turn into a drunk? Turn into an alcoholic. Turn into a drug addict. Turn into whatever addiction you could grab onto to kill the pain in your life. What do you do for a living?
Construction.
Construction. And you?
Fish biologist, retired.
An electrician.
Electrician. Okay. These are definitions of self. What are you? I'm a carpenter. I'm a laborer. I'm an electrician. Those they help define you as a man. Imagine having your whole world changed and the definition of self removed. I'm no longer a provider. I'm no longer a hunter, a fisherman, because we couldn't travel off the reservation at one point. Those are definitions. That helps define a man's role. The woman's role did not really change that much. She was still the stay-at-home mom. She was the teacher. She was she basically owned the house. But the children she was in charge of the children. So her definition didn't change. But a man's definition, it ended. For a few that could make that switch to working in the lumber mill, logging, they did. They became loggers, and that gave them a sense of self. But to those who annually followed the fishing, who put the meat on the table, the fish on the table, who took their kids out to go dig roots and pick berries, that ended. And the self-destruction started rising. And yeah, you had a good image of the drunken Indian. But if you look at its parallel, you had the drunken Irishman. What happened to him? He was stripped of land, title, nobility, everything, and sentenced to the colonies, to work in the penal colonies, Australia, New Zealand, New Amsterdam, Nova Scotia, sent there to open up the new frontier. But having been stripped of all that, they were eager to come. It was something better than starving to death. That's the plight. That was the option that was given us. So a lot of Indians signed up for relocation. They were relocated, educated. A lot of our families were sent into the cities and given the bare minimum of a training to become plumbers, electricians, flag wavers, flagmen, all of this. And then just dumped into the inner ghettos. Given enough, they were given like 3 months paid rent for your families, for you and your wife, and if you had a child. And they had to go sink or swim. It failed. It was the great failure of the relocation period. Well, that's a brief history. Then we get into, again, the days of rage, the 60s and everything. But kind of started looking up. We were digging out of the civil rights era. We had gained the right to vote, except on reservations. Ironic. I tell people that Nespelem, which was 99% or 94% Indian, they had their own school, but not a single Indian on the school board. And why? Because you had to be a tax-paying property owner to run for school board. So our school, which was 94% Indian, all education and everything was controlled by 8 non-Indians. They dictated. And it kind of looks like it might be going back that way again with this administration. It's crazy. Everything is old is new again. Well, I had this love affair with water. Crystal and her daughter pulled me out of the Tianaway during high water. They just saw an Indian floating by, so they grabbed me. It was me. And Salida, the Nana, bobbing down the Nana. And my cousin Alan scooped me out of there. Swinomish. I didn't know anything about tides, so where I waded out earlier was now in high water. I stepped out and went, phew, disappeared. And there was a kid there who saw me, young man, he comes flying out there and grabbed me. Well, I always had long hair, but not this long. He pulled me up by the hair, pulled me. Yeah, water has always intrigued me. It was almost taken my life 9 times, 10 times now. So I am so glad to see my granddad used to fish up here. There used to be big fishing camps where Huanam or the old Wagner Ranch is. On the opposite side from the Wagner Ranch, there was fishing villages, seasonal fishing villages. His grandmother, Soda Maine, had her fishing camp there. Soda Maine, Soyatson, Methow Joe, lived to be 104. My grandparents, there was Luke Jim, Charlie Luke, him and his family. If I stood there, I could tell you who was here and who was here going up the river, because that's Grandpa made sure that I understood, or they were in proximity to who the next camps were. That was important to them because they set up every year. Then they outlawed us. We weren't able to fish anymore. But my granddad, Jerome Miller, Ashlachen, he never stopped. He was grabbed, he was arrested. They threw it out of court every time. Thank you, Judge Brown. Judge William Compton Brown. He was a great friend of our family. He was also the judge in Okanagan. And later on, I would visit him, up until just about 2 years before he died. I spent some time. Grandpa would go in there and visit with him, and then he would stick me in his library, and I could sit in his library and read books. And he told me that, he said, he wasn't going to get into a pissing war with the government over fishing rights that we had not extinguished. We held those fishing rights. These were still ours. Our hunting and our fishing rights on the Moses Columbia Reservation was never sold. So, nor was our gathering for berries, for roots, for medicines, for food, for all that. We never surrendered those. We never relinquished those rights. So, here we are. I'm so glad to see the salmon returning. My buddy Phil Davis over here told me he's seen the salmon coming up, the blacks. We used to call them the blacks. They're the fall run of kings. They're black. So we call them the black salmon, clay, clay. And it's so good to hear that. That is like music to my ears. So when our people came, when mankind, we say skinto. That means Indian people, skinto. When we came to this land, the giant animals still existed. We're named for our technology. Isn't that strange? Clovis man, Folsom man, Angostura man. We're named for our technology, or the arrowheads, or the spear points that we made. We're the same people, same fucking Indians. We just at different points. Are you the Cadillac woman? There's Cadillac man right there. Before that, there was Person Buggy man. Well, we're named for our technology. Well, back before the world was turned upside down, before the Great Flood, there existed all these giant animals. Shosquinoidal, stretchy nose, woolly mammoth. We call it shosquinoidal. I like our words. They're so descriptive. It's like car, people can wrinkle feet. Well, back before the world was turned upside down, we lived in different areas, and we had made a promise to the Creator that we would look after His land. We would look after the animals, only take what we needed from the land. And one of the promises we made is that we would never live close. My great-grandfathers, when they tell the story, don't live close to the bone. Don't live close to the bone. In other words, don't live next to where your food is. You tend to exploit and waste. So we lived high in the hills, overlooking rivers, overlooking this great savanna. At that point, there was a wall of ice, the glaciers, and they talk about it. And below it was the warm winds from the south are melting the ice and creating this huge savanna of grasslands in which these giant animals lived. And for millenniums, we lived off of those animals, then, and still maintained our promise. But over the centuries, they noticed there were lights. From their vantage point, they could see firelights, which meant other people moving into their territory. But we kept our promise. We stayed high. I mean, not high. We stayed high in the mountains. And they woke one morning to the sounds of screaming of animals and this rush of wind coming down. The floods had started, the Big Brett's floods. The glacier had broken, thanks to Coyote. He didn't warn us. And the animals were being swept away. And it's like, why aren't there any evidence of people out on the plateau prior to this? I said, well, put everything in a giant blender, rocks, sticks, everything, and hit high. That's what happened. That flood came with so deep, so ferocious, it just liquefied everything. Didn't stop until it hit the ocean. Well, all the way across the country, this is happening. The glaciers are breaking. Places are being flooded. Some of them didn't stop until they, covered the plains, the Great Lakes. Without their food source, people were starving. So the Creator, He sent Coyote. He awoke Coyote and told him that He was giving him a job. And Coyote, oh God, not another job. I broke that damn wall of ice and da-da-da. Yeah, well, now you broke the ice, now the people are starving to death because you broke the ice all at once. You're supposed to let out a little, okay. So Coyote is entrusted with the responsibility of feeding the people, feeding man who is coming. So Coyote took his chlup. Chlup is we call it talking stick. It was his stick of power. And he smacked the land and sent a message out. He brought forth all of the animals, kind of like, the Noah story, except this is real. Don't laugh. How many of you believe in God? Raise your hand. Just a few. How many believe in Sasquatch? That's funny, because more people have seen Sasquatch than God. You people. Anyway, Coyote calls them, and he tells them, I need people to help feed man who is coming. Who will volunteer? Who amongst your people? And Bear goes, so weak and puny, why didn't you just let him die? Big help. Cougar goes, well, I eat them, why would I want to feed them? One by one they decline. Finally, there is nobody. Fox goes, I would, but I'm just too puny. There's nothing on me. Fox was Coyote's older brother. So, God, in despair, he just given up. He started heading down the river. He came to the giant otters at Rock Island. Giant. They weren't interested in feeding man. All the way down. He went all the way to the ocean. And there at the ocean, he took his club. He hit the water, sending a message. And all of the sea forms, all of this, the people of the sea, the whales, the seals, everything came forward. And he told them what he was trying to do. He had to feed man who was coming. Who amongst you will step forward and help feed man who is coming? Orca, no, none of them. One by one they decline. Finally, Coyote turns around and he looks at his brother Fox. He said, I failed. Man will starve now because of us. He said, what was it about my message that they didn't like? What about my message? Why would they say no? And as they turn to walk away, they hear a voice. And he turns around, and the voice is going, we'll help you. We'll help feed man who's coming. In Titiana, Hanu, Kasu, Shwan, the different salmon are all sitting there. The king salmon, Shwan, the sockeye salmon, Hanu, silver, Kasu, Dor. They all agree. And so Coyote starts his march up the river, singing, happy, dancing, singing, until they come to Cascade Locks. And there at Cascade Locks is a big dam that was built there by mud swallows. And they're not going to release it. So Coyote uses his club and destroys it. Now when man who is coming, when he sees you dipping out of the water, he'll know the salmon are coming. You will be the messenger. Go, he tells him. He gets to Celilo. There the giant beavers have built a huge dam. Before the Dallas Dam, there was Celilo Dam. And he tells them, he asks them, will you open up the dam so that the salmon can come through? We're on a mission to feed man who is coming. They just much. What's that sign you were giving me, Phil? That's what they did. That was their message to Coyote. In other words, no, we're not interested. So he took his club, he shatters the dam, he turns, smacks them, and reduces them down from giants to small, the beaver that you know. He said, you'll no longer be able to build and block the salmon. And he said, but man who is coming, he will value you for your furs. You will be one of the first foods for man who is coming, for your treachery. And he comes all the way up, hitting the klickitat, the white salmon, the deschutes, the snake, hitting all the tributaries. He releases the salmon following him to all these tributaries. He comes up to the Wenatchi, and there at the Wenatchi, there's 3 witches. They built a dam across. One of them was Loon, the other one was Shag, and the other one was Mudhead. 3 sisters, but we know them as witches. And they refuse. As a matter of fact, Coyote doesn't want to get into a fight with them because they're powerful. And he goes up on the shore and he sits there and he says, this is as far as the salmon are gonna come, so people won't be able to live up here. And he hears a voice, Hamish, Hamish. Turtle dove, morning dove. Coyote goes over and she said, you know, they go upriver every day to gather food, and the dam is unprotected there. Good idea, good to know. But they'll probably just rebuild it if it's broken, probably. But how am I gonna do this? She said, well, here's an idea. And she takes a bunch of reeds and she quickly fashions this basket. And she said, so you bring it upriver. When they get back, you bring it upriver and you get in the basket. You change yourself. You have the power to change, to cloak yourself, to change yourself into a baby, because that's the one thing they wanted that they can't have. So Coyote does, kind of doing the Moses thing, floating down the river. He's discovered by them. And they're just so excited. They finally got the one thing they've all wanted, a baby in a box. So, well, how are we going to take care of him? When we go up, we have to go gather food tomorrow. We can't be packing a baby around in this. Oh, geez. Well, I'll stay with him. It's Hamish. Morning dove steps in and says, I'll look after them. You three can go up. So as soon as they disappear going upriver to go, or up the lake, to go gather food, Hamish signals Coyote, and he turns back into Coyote, takes his club and destroys the dam there at Peshastin. And they notice their water's going lower and lower and lower, and they scream and they all come flying down the river, only to find their dam is gone, it's destroyed. And Coyote is standing there. For your treachery, he said. And he takes loon. He takes this choker of dentilium he has around his neck. He throws it at her. And he said, from now on, he said, you will not be, what is it? You cannot cannibalize, you cannot, because they were giant then. They were big, they were monsters. And he turns her into the loon that you see today. And you see the loon's necklace that she wears as a testament to her treachery. And if you try eating too much fish, if you try eating salmon, you'll choke to death, because that choker will choke you to death. And he takes Shag, cormorant, and he throws spots on her back, so man who is coming will know of him. And he grabs her. She had a beautiful, long color, guac, spear nose. And he grabs her beak, pulls on it, and twists it at the end. No longer will you have that beautiful spear nose. Now go. He comes to my hand and he said, since you were kind of neutral, he said, man who is coming will not eat you. He will not like you. You'll taste like mud, because everything you eat will be at the bottom of this lake, bottom of this river. Go. Sends them off. And he turns, and as a covenant to thee, as a promise to the salmon, a promise he made them, that the fish, that the salmon, the people, salmon people, will be able to return to the streams of their birth, to lay their eggs and to die. They would die in their homeland in which they were spawned. And so that's how the Peshastin pinnacles, which are the singing salmon, they came out of the sides of the mountain. And mankind, Indian people, they learned from the salmon. It's the first ceremony, salmon ceremony. We learn songs, we learn ceremonies of Thanksgiving. We take every year at the Icicle, at Bridgeport, different areas, we have first salmon ceremony, in which we celebrate the return of the salmon. And we don't destroy the carcass, we remove the meat off of the salmon, and leave the bones, and return the bones back into the river, so that the salmon will know it's been respected, it will always return. How's that, Aaron? Can I do a beat? Wait, I'm like Donald Trump. You can applaud, you know. We live in a very blessed world here, almost insulated. And that's why the Methow people felt so safe here. Because on one side of us were the Cascades, a mountain range was an obstacle to be dealt with. On the other side, the Okanagan Highlands or the foothills of the Rockies. But around us, all around us, there were Salish-speaking people. We were cradled in a glove of like-speaking people, of people who loved the salmon, who loved the trade. Our people were rich for trading. People from the other side of the mountain would come over trading, bringing stuff over, coming through basically the same avenues that you leave and go over on the coast on now. And they would bring over things from the coast, abalone shells, shells that we adorned and made into beautiful, these loop breastplates made from the clam shells or from freshwater clams here. They brought over abalone shells. They brought over so many things from the sea, dried clams, which we loved. It was like, that was our fentanyl then. We had good drugs. And in turn, we traded them. Even until my grandmother was still alive in the 60s, we would gather the mountain goat hair from up here, and she would clean it and send it over because they used it to make blankets and robes. That was a big trade item. When Grandpa was younger, he discovered the quarries, the cuts, in which the old-time people used to gain copper out of. He would find these areas in which the ground was seeping, weeping, kind of a turquoise blue. It meant there was copper in there. And so the old-timers would do a big V-cut into the bank. Then they would pack it with dried logs, dried wood, and they would burn for 2 days, 3 days. They would burn it hot, hot, hot. Then they would let the ground cool, and he said it was like talcum powder. And he said, and as you dug it, balls of copper would roll out, because copper, like mercury, will gather. And as heated and liquefied, it would find its own level. And they would roll out, and they would take those copper ingots or their copper balls, and they would trade the raw copper to the coast people who loved copper. You know, they made their bling with it. And copper shields that they traded on the coast, copper daggers. Well, there was a big trade, and our people understood big time what the importance of bartering. And of course, you had the biggest traders were the Chinook people from the mouth of the Columbia. And they would come up, armadas of canoes would come up as, all the way up to Kettle Falls to trade with the river people. And everybody brought their best. You brought your A game. Over here, corn husk bags that they didn't make on the coast. We all, it's like, wherever you go, you like eating in other people's towns, other people's cities. You like their food. Oh, I wish we had this at our place. What you do, it's called pizza. Yeah, but our pizza is like this. Well, it's just different, it's not better. We made cedar root baskets. They came from cedar root country, so of course they made great baskets. So we traded in baskets, in bags, and children. Isn't that funny? No, we weren't sex trafficking our children. We believed that our strength came from our families. We would give our son or our daughter in exchange for their son or daughter, who would stay with us until they were young adults. Then they got to make a choice. Are you going to stay or you want to go back? I want to go back. So they would go back, and said person over there would have to come back. I didn't want to leave. Look at it. I like the coast. Sorry, the coast doesn't need you anymore. But it strengthened our bonds. When they needed help, like when Leschi and Seattle went to war, they called on their relatives from this side of the mountains, who gladly went over and joined the Leschi Wars, the Snoqualmie, the Green River, the White River Massacres. All of those wars were a combination of many Salish bands and tribes. So I say you're in a blessed land here that we occupied. Some of our descendants were from here before they were driven out. And then it became kind of inhospitable for us to return. The farmers did not want us walking across their land, even though they weren't using it. They leased this land for grazing. So they made it pretty well known and uncomfortable for us to return. And it's just been recently that you all have been invited. And so we're now at Huanam, bum. I'll play my flute for you, Huanam, bum. I did that down one and they didn't like it. My Huanam, bum. Anyway, we're here for the fish as well, or you should be, because it is a keystone species. It's what made the Evergreen State evergreen. That's what makes these valleys so lush, so rich. It's the bodies of those salmon that for hundreds of thousands of years have fertilized, have watered this land. And I say, unless you take care of this relative of ours, we're gonna look like Douglas County, okay? We all know Douglas and Grant County. They don't put any water into this system. Oh yeah, Foster Creek, but hell, I spit more than that. Anyway, there's a great reason to be interested in TTI. This was taken in Colville Falls. That salmon must have been like that. Grappa hauled one out of there, 86 pounds. All the way, how far is it up the river? 500, 600 miles up the river from the ocean? Probably more than that. And can you imagine what that sucker weighed when he came into the mouth of the Columbia? Well, that was the size of salmon back then. They called them the June hogs. There's pictures of them 120, 125 pounds. I remember them catching one out of Salilo, 102 pounds. That was Grandpa. Mom caught a sturgeon out of there. It was over 400 pounds. She had to use the back of the pickup, the tow bar, to whip it out. Anyway, I'm going to end. Is there any questions here?
Randy, how old are you?
Not very. In dog years, closer to 100 than I am to 50.
Well, at the beginning, Randy, you said something about maybe it was like hard to define who the Methow people are, or and I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit. You remember what you're?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, we're Methow by. Here's how I put it. Most Methows are Methow by proximity, by relocation. They were placed here as part of the Moses Columbia Reservation. They were brought in here from the late 1870s through to about 82. And so a lot of the names don't necessarily, like Childahuist Jim. Childahuist Jim, he wasn't Methow, he was Okanagan, but he was married into the Methow. And there's so much fluidity here. You can't really say who's Methow and who's Okanagan, who's not. And Elaine, I go round and round with Elaine and say, well, he wasn't Methow. I said, well, you weren't either. Time was while you were Shishkin, you were Yakima. Wrong duck. People don't want to go back any farther. I think their sense of self is locked where they're at. And so there's Methows that are mostly Chelan. There's Methows that are mostly Entiat. It's just where you were placed and how many generations been there. It seems like you become Methowized. It's kind of like y'all are Methows now. By location, you are. Any other questions? Yes.
Would fishing historically have taken place, in a great part of the Methow, or was it sort of like places like Salilo and Kettle Falls where most of it was taking place and trading outward?
It's the type of fishing that you were doing. They had different methods of taking the salmon at different locations. Methow Rapids, which is in the Columbia River, which was blown apart for the ferries to come up, the flat bottom boats to come up. That was a big fishery. Then as you came up the Methow, there at First Bridge, my mom and them were a young girl and her brother. They would come up here to where the big rock slide is, where all the white stone is, and they would gather rocks, and they'd break them up. And they'd bring them back down there, then they would lay them on the bottom of the river. Then they would build a catwalk scaffold along the cliff. It would hug the cliff. And every few feet there was an opening, a square opening. It was all woven together like a loose basket. And they would walk on that, and at night they would put out their torches, and they would watch the salmon. Then they'd spear the salmon because they could see them illuminated over the rocks, silhouetted over the rocks. And that's where Shwaram, that's what they call the mountain up here. It used to be Squaw Peak, Squaw Mountain, whatever it is. Well, they renamed it. And it just means Shwaram, where the white rocks are laid there, where they spear the salmon. And I told Elaine, I said, no, I think it was called Shwarach, because it means that Shwarachan means that little frog that you hear in the spring peeper. That's Shwarachan. Because there are no salmon up on that mountain. Why would they call it? Or they spear salmon. No, I argued with her about that. She's older.
How far up would they be fishing up the Methow?
Oh, they go all the way up to by Phil Davis's. Matter of fact, he's squatting right on our fishing ground. He's just going our fishing ground.
Like, where's that at?
Up to Chihuahua. No, well, it's like salmon in any condition is edible. And but we allowed the spawned out salmon to feed the ground, to feed the river, to become nutrients and fertilizer. But before that, before they spawned out, we'd catch them here, and you could tell what a spawned out salmon looks like. They're pretty rough looking. But they'd catch them, and they would dry them. You could always do something with the salmon. You dried it, you smoked it, you pounded it, and made they call it kunch, which is, it's like Grandma and them used to take dried salmon, especially those that were in their last week, and they would dry them. Then they would take them, and they would pull the skin off from them before they dried them. Then when they became super dry, they would put them in these mortars, stone mortars. And down at Pateras, there was a whole area they were carved right out of the rock, out of the granite sticking out there. And there were these kettles, and that's what they were for. When I was a little kid, I found them, and I sat in one, I was pretending like it was my toilet. My grandma came over and beat my ass. You're disrespecting the elders. No, I'm not, I'm taking it down. Okay, anyway, they would pound that fish until it would rise like eagle down. They would pound the oils out of it. Then it would just rise until it was just fluffy. Then Grandma and them take those same skins, and they had them soaking in water until they were pliable, and they would stitch them together and make like a ball, like a basketball, and they would pound all those salmon back into that ball. They would get 8 salmon in one ball, just packed as hard as a rock. Then when you had celebrations, when you had gatherings, ceremonies, they would cut one of those open, and then they would take it out, and one little bunch like this dropped into a pot would make an entire soup. They'd drop their camas in there, their bitter roots, and they would make what we call tawasali. And you could make that out of salmon, or you could salmon or tawasali with dried eels, same thing. But every one of these fish, including the suckers, we love the cold water suckers. They weren't a scrap fish. They weren't a bottom. All fish are scrap fish when you think about it. Oh, it's too bony. Fuck, all fish have approximately the same amount of bones. They're just not as fatty as salmon. And so, besides, y'all eat other things that are less attractive. Sole. Oh yeah, right. I mean, oysters, those snot rocks. Any other questions?
Is that answer, Richard? I think so, yeah.
There are different, there was different areas in which they only employed this dip net in waterfall areas, Salilo, Kettle Falls, Rock Island, they used dip nets. And before dip nets, they used gaff hooks, big gaff hooks, or spears. There was a big fight that took place around before the turn of the century at Salilo, because old-time people wanted only gaff hook and spears, not the dip net. They thought that they were taking too much with the dip net, that there wasn't enough reverence or respect. And so it wasn't until shortly after the turn of the century, and they realized that the Shuriapis, the white people, were taking all the fish with their fish wheels that were right above the falls. Were taking most of the fish. So we gotta get with the times. So they started using the dip net more, or the box trap right below the falls. It was made like a open weave basket. And they were like 8 feet long, and they were hung right below the falls, so the salmon jumping up would come back and land in those. Well, that was for the community. Everybody benefited from that. You all had a share in that, because it took the whole community to lift them out. And the same way with, on the coast, you see reef netting or beach seining. The whole tribe turns out. They're at Laconer, they're at Lummi, they're at Toledo to pull the nets in, and you each get a share. Well, same here. When you had those big box traps, and on the Columbia, they would use a V-type trap that was basically a seine, and it was between 2 canoes, and they would paddle together going up the river, capturing the salmon as he went along. And that was still employed up until the 50s. So, to answer your question, here they gaff hooked and they speared mostly on the Methow. Okay, you've been a wonderful, wonderful group. Thank you.
You don't get away that easy. One more story. Then you're going there. You gotta tell us about the lamprey.
Oh,
Please.
they are funny. Lamprey, we call them say Ternocum. Yeah, that's the eel, the lamprey eel. They're old, we say, they're an ancient people. We always refer to other life forms as they're an ancient people. They're amongst the oldest people on this earth. And they have survived through 5 different houses. We're in the house made of dawn. We're in the house where everything seeing is believing. Well, there were different houses back. The last one was the golden age of mammals, the giant mammals. Before that was the giant lizards, where Spexman came from. And before that, there was, what is that? Is that the Miocene or Eocene? Where the eel came from. He was older than sharks. He's older than this land. Eels came about as one of the very first of the Creator's creations. Well, they used to be in this river. They used to be thick in this river. And my grandpa Jerome Miller, he didn't allow us to play along the shore because that's where the baby eels were. They were right under the sand, and he went and he pulled back some sand once. He looked kind of like a clam, you know how it makes that little squirt? He walked down and he picked out 2 or 3 and dug down, and sure enough, they were about the size of angleworms, about the size of an earthworm, right underneath there, gathering their food with their mouths out. He said, and if you step on it, you kill them. And he used to get so upset when he saw boaters and stuff pulling right up on their boats. Going to have fewer eels. Well, Salilo, when they would come up Salilo Falls, they would come up thousands at a time, thousands in schools. And they would come up the falls. You know, they're not a very strong swimmer. They stayed together in a these big schools that were like gigantic ropes of them coming up the river. Then they would come to Salilo Falls. They couldn't make the swim on the other side of the falls. If I'm in Oregon right now and I'm looking across Salilo Falls, here's the falls here. But on the other side, the rest of the Columbia River is going down at a very swift rate with no falls, but that was too swift for them. They would come as far as the falls, then they would go up the rivulets alongside of the wall, on the side of the falls. They would all go up using their little suction cups to go up. Well, one of Grandpa's relatives, Walter Yokes, another one, Charlie Oatman, and Otis Shiloh and his wife, they were always after Mom. Have your boys get us some eels. So when Mom heard the rain were coming in, she'd get out, she'd get my gear out. I had a harness that had a little metal ring on the back. So I felt like a dog with a leash on it. She took that off, and out the door we go. You're wagging my tail. Headed for the falls. And I had a little tiny miner's lamp on, forehead. And my bag, my eel bag. And she threw me over the falls. She had me anchored. She threw me over the falls, and she was trolling. She was using me. She was chumming. She was trolling for eels with me. And my job was to go along the side there, kick myself over, and start grabbing those things and throwing them into the bag as they're squirming around. Well, sometimes I'd grab 2 or 3, and they'd be sticking on my arms. I had one stick onto my eyelid once. Mom says, shut up and stick your face in the water. And it slipped off. Things you learn. Well, we'd get 100, 150 pounds of eels that night. And it was like magic. Nobody had phones. Nobody had electricity. They would show up. They were waiting for those rains, and they knew Mom had gotten eels. So they would show up. And they'd come and they would knock on the door, and Mom and them opened up, and they'd come in and they'd be dragging bundles, buckskin, smoked hides, dried meat to trade for eels. That's how valuable they were. Not money, barter. And they'd say, how much do you want for this much? And they'd put out a pan. How much do you want for this? Mom said, you got to talk to that boy over there. He's the one who got him. So that was my first adventures into bartering and haggling. They were tough. They always screwed me. They won all the time. Their lives were not on the line. My mom was so proud of me. Yeah, you're rather good at either that or drown. So, and anyway, the eels, to us, they're as important. They mean as much as salmon to us. They're that valuable. What do I say? The chemistry of eels. They present, they have proteins and stuff in them that are so valuable to people. Ask the Japanese. And the East Coast tribes who really depend on eels too. Just how important that is. And it's, it all contributes to a better ecosystem, better people. If you ate more eels, you'd be happier people. I cooked them down at the Pateras Salmon Bake this year. I had some eels, thanks to John Crandall. Where's John? So, thanks to John, I was able to cook the eels. And everybody who ate them liked them. It's how you cook them. See, people cook them the wrong way so many times. But I learned when I was a kid, I watched Grandma and them, they would take a pan of coarse ground salt. And they first removed the cartilage out of the backs of the eel, so you didn't have this popping, crunching sound, kind of nasty. It's like baby duck heads. And so you remove the cartilage, and then you take it and you slide it through the salt, and the salt takes all the slime off. And that's what people can't get over, because when it's cooked with the slime on, it gives it kind of this tough, plasticky coating that's not that good at tasting, but you remove it with the salt. And then you put them on skewers, on sticks, long sticks, and you start roasting them over the fire. Then as they roast, you hold them up, and literally the fluid, the oils, it runs like water out of them. There's that much oil. And you keep doing it until it no longer runs and it's just a slow drip. Then they're ready. Then you take them out and serve them. They do it wrong down there. That's the reason people don't like them. We go to a few places in which eels are cooked poorly. They don't take the time. That we really impressed, my grandfolks really impressed upon me. You have to take the time to prepare them. Eels have never been easy. They've always had their problematics about them. Getting them, for one. It's not for the faint of heart, having them squirming, sticking to you, and not knowing how to get them off. You try pulling them off, you'll flesh yourself. You'll pull the skin right off. I used to throw them on my brother when we were kids. We'd be walking up the Methow River at the mouth, and there was little rivulets out of the river at the confluence there. And the eels would be swimming up these little rivulets because they were gently, a lot easier to go up. And I'd see them and I'd throw them on my brother. He didn't have a shirt on, they'd stick to his back. And he would do this eel dance, standing there screaming and spinning around and hollering. That's what you do with older brothers. Right, John? Anyway, is that what you were wanting, Aaron?
Perfect.
Huh?
That's it, that's perfect.
Once again, I put him to sleep. Sorry. Thank you.